The studio lights blazed against the polished floor, casting a sharp glow on two figures seated across from each other. On one side, Vice President Kamala Harris, confident, poised, her signature smile sharpened into something resembling challenge. On the other, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, calm, steady, his posture firm as if bracing for yet another political storm. The audience buzzed with anticipation. Journalists shuffled papers, cameras zoomed in, and social media hashtags were already climbing before the debate had even begun. Everyone knew this clash was going to be different. Harris had been circling Abbott for weeks with subtle digs, calling his policies outdated, his leadership cold and unfeeling. Tonight, though, she planned to take it further. And she wasted no time. "Governor," Harris began, her voice silky but edged with sarcasm, "Texans deserve a leader who doesn't just sit back in his chair and issue talking points. They deserve someone who stands up for them, literally and figuratively." A ripple shot through the crowd. The jab was obvious, mocking Abbott's disability without saying it outright. Gasps filled the room, followed by nervous laughter from a few corners. The moderator shifted uncomfortably, unsure if he should intervene. Abbott didn't flinch. His eyes locked on Harris, his face calm but unreadable. He let the silence stretch for a beat longer than expected, letting the weight of her words settle on the room. Harris leaned back, confident she'd landed a blow. She smirked faintly, adjusting her microphone as the camera zeroed in. But in that quiet, something shifted. The audience wasn't just reacting to her remark, they were waiting. Waiting to see how Abbott would respond. And Abbott knew it. He had spent years in Texas politics facing storms fiercer than this. He wasn't about to be shaken now. As the crowd leaned forward, Abbott's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. The comeback was coming, and it promised to change everything. The silence in the studio stretched thin, sharp enough to cut through the tension. All eyes fixed on Abbott, waiting. Harris shifted slightly in her chair, her smirk lingering, convinced she had already won this exchange. But Abbott wasn't rattled. He leaned forward just a fraction, his hand resting steady on the arm of his chair, his voice low at first, almost conversational. "Madam Vice President," he began, each word deliberate, "you can mock me if you want. You can point at my chair, my condition, my challenges. But let me tell you something, Texans don't judge a leader by how he stands. They judge him by how he stands up for them." The room erupted, cheers from one side, stunned silence from the other. Harris's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. The moderator raised his brows, sensing the shift. Abbott pressed on, his voice growing stronger, no longer conversational but commanding. "You see, I've faced storms in Texas that would break most politicians. Hurricanes, blackouts, border crises, you name it. And through every single one, I didn't back down. Not once. Because leadership isn't about posture. It's about backbone." The crowd clapped louder now, the sound bouncing off the studio walls. Harris leaned forward, trying to cut in, but Abbott didn't give her the space. His timing was surgical. "You want to talk about standing?" Abbott continued, his tone sharp now, every word a blow. "I stand taller in this chair, every single day, than some politicians ever will in their entire careers. Because while they chase cameras, I fight for people. While they mock, I act. And while they lecture, Texans lead." The applause thundered, overwhelming Harris's attempt to respond. She sat back, her expression tight, realizing her jab had backfired. The smirk that once lit her face had evaporated. Abbott didn't smile this time. His face was calm, his eyes steady, his words ringing through the studio like a verdict, firm, final, unforgettable. The studio was no longer just a debate stage, it was a battlefield, and Abbott had just seized the high ground. His words hung in the air like a thunderclap, echoing in the stunned silence that followed. For a moment, even the cameras seemed frozen, capturing Harris's tightened jaw and Abbott's unflinching stare. Then the dam broke. Applause erupted from sections of the live audience, some people rising to their feet, clapping with the kind of raw energy usually reserved for victory rallies. A chant started small, Abbott. Abbott. Before swelling through the room, cameras swinging wildly to capture the unexpected surge. The moderator tried to regain control, but the noise was overwhelming. Backstage, staffers scrambled as phones buzzed non-stop. Social media was already catching fire. A 12-second clip of Harris's jab, followed by Abbott's powerful comeback, shot across Twitter under the hashtag #AbbottStrikesBack. Within minutes, it was trending nationwide. One user tweeted, "Kamala went low, but Abbott went higher than anyone expected. Legendary." Another wrote, "You don't mock a man who turns every challenge into strength." On Instagram, reels of Abbott's line, "I stand taller in this chair every single day," circulated with captions like, "This is what leadership looks like." TikTok edits were already being stitched together, set to dramatic music, painting Abbott as the underdog who turned humiliation into triumph. Harris, sensing the momentum slipping, leaned forward in her seat, her voice cutting through the noise, "Governor, let's not make this about theatrics, let's talk policy." She tried to steady her tone, tried to reframe the discussion. But the damage was done. The audience wasn't hearing her policy pivot. They were still buzzing about Abbott's rebuke. Abbott, meanwhile, sat quietly, hands folded, letting the crowd's energy do the work for him. He didn't need to gloat. His silence spoke volumes. For once, Kamala Harris, the vice president known for her sharp comebacks, was the one left scrambling. Harris adjusted her blazer, leaning closer to the microphone with renewed determination. Her voice was sharper now, the smooth confidence giving way to a hint of defensiveness. "Governor," she said firmly, "Texans deserve more than sound bites. They deserve solutions. And what I see from your administration is rhetoric without results, policies that leave too many families behind." The words carried weight, but the crowd's energy wasn't with her. Some clapped politely, but the earlier fire had dimmed. On social media, the clip of her earlier mockery was already overshadowed by Abbott's viral comeback. Every second that passed tilted the balance further. Abbott listened without interrupting, his eyes fixed on her with the calm patience of someone who'd been underestimated one too many times. Then, when Harris paused to catch her breath, he leaned forward, his tone steady, almost surgical. "Madam Vice President," he began, "you want to talk about solutions? Let's talk facts. In Texas, we didn't wait for Washington to hand us permission slips. We cut taxes so small businesses could hire again. We secured our border when federal leaders failed to act. We powered our grid with the largest wind and solar capacity in the nation while still protecting oil and gas jobs. That's not rhetoric. That's results." Applause burst out again, louder this time, drowning out Harris's attempt to interject. Abbott pressed on, voice rising just enough to command the room. "And here's the real difference between us, I don't spend my time mocking Americans who face challenges. I spend my time proving that challenges can be overcome. Texans don't need a vice president's pity or her punchlines. They need strength, and they've seen it in action." The crowd roared. Harris's lips tightened, the smug confidence that had started the night now replaced with visible frustration. Abbott's words had landed not just as a rebuttal, but as a reminder of resilience, turning her attempted jab into his strongest weapon. The studio air was thick now, the kind of tension you could almost taste. Viewers leaned forward in their seats while cameras zoomed tight on the two faces locked in combat. Harris wasn't ready to concede this moment, her reputation demanded a counterattack. She straightened, her voice cutting sharper than before. "Governor Abbott, you brag about Texas as if it's some shining example. But let's be clear, your policies leave families struggling, your grid failures left people freezing, and your so-called independence has cost lives. Texans don't need excuses dressed as victories. The crowd rippled with mixed reactions. Some clapped, others booed, and a wave of murmurs coursed through the room. Harris had gone for the jugular, hoping to pierce Abbott's armor. She leaned back, her eyes glittering with the confidence of someone who thought she'd found her opening. Abbott, however, didn't blink. Instead, he let the noise wash over him before raising a hand, steady and commanding. The room quieted almost instinctively. His voice, low but firm, carried through the silence. "Madam Vice President," he said, his words deliberate, "Texans didn't elect me to whine about challenges. They elected me to solve them. When our grid failed, we fixed it. When Washington left our border wide open, we acted. And when critics like you mocked us, we showed results instead of excuses." The crowd erupted, this time with thunderous applause. Harris opened her mouth to interject, but Abbott wasn't finished. His tone sharpened, his gaze unwavering. "You can throw every insult, every accusation, every talking point at me. But let's be clear, Texans don't measure their leaders by headlines. They measure them by resilience. And I'll tell you right now, no storm, no crisis, and no vice president's mockery will ever break the spirit of Texas." The words slammed down like a gavel. The audience shot to their feet, clapping, shouting, cheering. Hashtags surged across social media, #AbbottUnshaken, #TexasStrong. Harris's expression hardened, the frustration visible. For all her sharp rhetoric, Abbott's calm defiance had shifted the night's momentum beyond her control. The roar of the audience was deafening. People stood from their seats, clapping and cheering, some even chanting Abbott's name as though the debate had transformed into a Texas rally. Camera operators scrambled to capture the moment, their lenses zooming in on the governor's calm, steady expression as he sat unwavering in the storm of applause. Online, the reaction was even more explosive. Twitter feeds flooded with clips, the hashtags #AbbottUnshaken and #TexasStrong surging into the top trends within minutes. TikTok users layered Abbott's words over patriotic music, captions flashing, "This is how you shut down mockery." On Instagram, reels of the exchange racked up thousands of likes, comment sections brimming with praise, "That's the Texas spirit," and "Never mock a man who embodies resilience." Meanwhile, Harris sat stiffly at her desk, her smile strained. The fire she had sparked had blazed out of her control, and Abbott had redirected it into a torch of his own. But she wasn't ready to walk away defeated. She leaned toward the microphone, raising her voice above the crowd. "Governor, applause doesn't change facts. Your record is filled with failures, on healthcare, on power, on education. Texans deserve a leader who actually delivers, not one who hides behind speeches." Her words cut sharp, but the timing was off. The crowd, still electrified by Abbott's last remarks, responded with mixed boos and scattered claps. Harris pressed on, her tone quickening, almost desperate now. "If you think your comebacks will distract from the truth, you're mistaken. The American people deserve more than theatrics." Abbott slowly turned his gaze back toward her, unfazed by the attempted pivot. His lips curved just slightly, not into a smile but into something firmer, an unspoken promise that his next words would seal the night. The vice president had gone for one last strike, but Abbott had the room, the momentum, and the narrative in his grasp. And everyone knew it. Abbott tilted his head slightly, the corners of his mouth tightening into something between resolve and challenge. The studio lights caught the steel in his eyes as he leaned toward the microphone. His voice, calm yet commanding, cut through the lingering noise like a blade. "Madam Vice President," he said evenly, "you call this theatrics. But what the American people just witnessed isn't a performance, it's a principle. Texans don't need a government that lectures them from Washington. They need leaders who will fight for them, not mock them." The crowd responded instantly, applause rolling like thunder, but Abbott raised a hand and the room quieted. He wanted every word to be heard. "You say my record is filled with failures. But let's set the record straight. When Washington couldn't secure the border, Texas did. When the economy faltered, Texas created more jobs than any other state. When families needed energy, Texas became the #1 producer of wind power in America while keeping our oil and gas strong. That's not failure. That's leadership. The studio vibrated with cheers, but Abbott's tone shifted lower, heavier, reaching into the emotional core of the room. "And let me be clear about one thing," he continued. "You can laugh at me. You can mock me. But when you mock me, you mock every American who faces adversity. You mock every soldier who came home with scars, every worker who pushes through hardship, every family that refuses to quit when life gets hard. And I'll tell you this, mocking resilience is the biggest mistake any leader can make." The audience rose to their feet, the ovation thundering, echoing off every wall. The chant returned, louder this time, "Abbott! Abbott! Abbott!" For Harris, the blow landed harder than any policy jab could. Her earlier confidence looked paper-thin now, shredded by the very resolve she had tried to belittle. The cameras captured it all, the vice president cornered, the governor commanding, the crowd electrified. And for millions watching at home, the narrative was no longer about a debate. It was about Abbott turning ridicule into strength, and turning the night into his victory. The studio no longer felt like neutral ground. The energy, the applause, the chants, it was all moving in one direction, and that direction was firmly behind Greg Abbott. Harris, once confident and commanding, now looked boxed in by the very stage she had hoped to dominate. The moderator tried to redirect the debate back to policy, but the crowd was too charged. Every time Harris spoke, her words were swallowed by scattered boos or polite, half-hearted claps. Every time Abbott responded, the audience answered with roaring approval. It was no longer a contest of ideas, it had become a showcase of resilience versus ridicule, and resilience was winning. Outside the studio, the impact was immediate and overwhelming. On Twitter, hashtags like #AbbottUnshaken, #TexasStrong, and #NeverMockResilience trended in the top 5 nationwide. Conservative commentators praised Abbott as a symbol of strength, while even some independents and moderates chimed in, "Not an Abbott fan, but that comeback was historic." Clips flooded TikTok, edited with dramatic slow motion and text overlays, "When you think you've landed the insult, but he flips it into victory." Instagram Reels paired his line, "I stand taller in this chair every single day," with swelling music, spreading the moment beyond politics into pure inspiration. Meanwhile, Harris's campaign team scrambled. On cable news, sympathetic analysts tried to spin the exchange as spirited debate, but even they couldn't ignore how badly the optics had turned. Her attempt at mockery was now the centerpiece of headlines framing Abbott as the man who turned insult into triumph. Abbott, for his part, didn't gloat. He sat steady, his expression composed, speaking only when asked, but every glance, every silence, carried the weight of someone who knew he had seized the night. The contrast was stark. Harris looked defensive, Abbott looked unshakable. And across America, millions watching from their living rooms saw not just a debate, but a moment that felt bigger, a moment that transformed Abbott from governor on the defensive into a national figure of resilience. By now, the debate wasn't just tipping in Abbott's favor, it was his stage, his narrative, his victory in real time. Every attempt by Harris to redirect the conversation to policy came across as defensive, almost reactive, while Abbott's composure gave the impression of someone not merely answering questions, but setting the terms of the discussion. The moderator's questions grew increasingly pointed, yet Abbott fielded them with ease. On energy, he countered with Texas's leadership in both oil and renewables. On jobs, he cited the state's booming economy. And each answer carried the same undertone: Texas acts while Washington talks. The audience responded with steady applause, the kind that reinforced the sense of momentum building around him. Harris, visibly frustrated, leaned harder on attacks. "Governor, your leadership has left millions vulnerable," she snapped at one point, her voice rising. But the crowd's reaction was muted, too many still caught up in the strength of Abbott's earlier rebuttals. Her words, which might have landed on another night, fell flat against the backdrop of Abbott's quiet dominance. Outside the studio, the narrative had already escaped her grasp. Cable news anchors began cutting into live coverage with commentary. On Fox News, a panelist declared, "Abbott just showed the country what resilience looks like." Even CNN analysts, often sympathetic to Harris, acknowledged the misstep. The vice president opened a door by mocking him, and Abbott slammed it shut with authority. The Washington Post published a breaking headline online: "Mockery backfires, Abbott's calm defiance steals debate spotlight." Meanwhile, clips of Abbott's "I stand taller in this chair" line had already hit over 2 million views across platforms before the debate even ended. Harris's campaign staff looked shaken as camera crews caught them whispering urgently behind the stage curtain. For all her attempts to pivot, Harris had been forced into defense, and Abbott, underestimated at the start, was now the unquestionable center of gravity. For millions of Americans watching, it was no longer just about Texas politics. It was about a governor who had turned an insult into a national moment. The moderator, sensing the end of the broadcast, raised his hand for silence. "We'll give each of you a brief closing statement," he said. The room, still charged with energy, fell into a restless hush. Harris spoke first. She straightened her shoulders, her voice calm but clipped, as if trying to reclaim the steadiness she had lost. "Tonight, we've discussed important issues: jobs, energy, education. The American people deserve leadership that meets challenges head-on with compassion and foresight. I will always stand for families, for equality, and for progress." She paused, forcing a smile, before adding, "No matter how loud the theatrics, the work must continue." Polite applause followed, but it was scattered, subdued. Then the camera swung to Abbott. He didn't rush. He looked into the crowd, then directly into the camera, his voice resonant but steady, as if speaking not just to the audience in the studio, but to every living room in America. "Texans, and Americans, don't measure their leaders by applause or headlines," he said. "They measure them by resilience. They measure them by results. I've faced challenges most people can't imagine. And every single day, I've turned those challenges into strength. That's what Texas is. That's what America is." The audience leaned in, silent, listening. Abbott continued. "You can mock me. You can doubt me. But I'll never quit. Not for 1 second. Because I know what it means to fight for families, for freedom, and for the future of this nation. And I promise you this, I will never stop standing tall for Texas, and for America." The final words landed like a hammer. The crowd exploded into a standing ovation, chants of "Abbott! Abbott!" filling the studio. Harris glanced down at her notes, her composure slipping as the applause thundered on. The camera zoomed tight on Abbott's calm, unshaken expression. The moderator thanked the participants, but the story of the night was already written. Harris's mockery had backfired, and Abbott had transformed it into one of the most viral, defining moments of his career. Tonight wasn't just about debating policies. It was about proving what real leadership looks like. "The vice president mocked me, but what she forgot is this: you don't weaken a man by pointing at his challenges, you strengthen him. Because every challenge I've faced has made me fight harder for Texas and for America. This chair doesn't hold me back. It carries me forward. And every single day, I roll into the fight with one mission: defend freedom, protect families, and keep America strong. That's what Texans expect, and that's what every American deserves. So mock me if you want. Doubt me if you want. But understand this: no insult, no storm, and no Washington politician will ever break the spirit of Texas. And as long as I draw breath, I'll never stop standing tall for this country."